Okay, hi guys. So obviously we're going into this online lecturing. Some Today I'll be posting two lectures. The one like to make up for the one we missed in week 6 in order to cover Nasser's foreign policy and the repercussions for the war defeat for the entire political system, and how like um, Nasser death led to kind of a radical shift in the main pillars of the foreign policy. And then I leave like the Islamic revival to the next week and the week after, when we talk about like Sadat and how he undertook some political reform measures um, that gave kind of Islamic thrust to the political landscape and the political regime, and then under Mubarak as well. So we are gonna go through the impact of the war defeat, the June defeat, on the internal dynamics and the shift in the foreign policy under Nasser and Sadat. Um, so so the question we tried to answer: how did Nasser actually respond to the opportunities and challenges emanated from the international context and the regional dynamics as well, and how he shaped the relationship between Egypt and the neighboring countries? So I leave like the impact of the war defeat on the changing foreign policy toward the end of this lecture. And then we need to focus on the impact of the war defeat on the internal dynamics or the domestic landscape. How can we compare between before and after 1967? So actually, it was a story after like the June defeat. It was a story of like power struggle between different factions or different power centers, Nasser and his competitors. But it was not new to Nasser's regime. It was like something old, dated back to the 50s, and then it became like salient after the June defeat. So actually, it had been kind of a struggle between Nasser and Amir, and both of them tried to attract more loyalists to their camps in order to entrench or consolidate their power. So Nasser basically had on his side the Minister of Interior and its General Investigative Department, and his Bureau of Information. It was like kind of intelligence apparatus, like related basically to the president. And Abdul Hakim Amir, he actually dominated the military, and he was in charge of the commander in chief for political guidance, and the intelligence department, and the general intelligence service as well. So during the South crisis, Nasser emerged as like a dominant political leader, although he consulted with his circles, the decision of the nationalization of the Suez Canal company, but he took this decision unilaterally and he prevailed over them. But ever since, it was kind of a political competition between Nasser himself and his kind of intimate circle, and Abdul Hakim Amir, that he tried to establish his own patronage network and his circle of loyalists in order to consolidate his power. So it was like kind of a struggle for supremacy and loyalty through doling out these kind of material benefits in order to attract loyalists to their sides. It was clear when we look into the ratio of officers in the cabinet, when Nasser tried several times and repeatedly to reduce the dominance of the military officers in the cabinet, and Abdul Hakim Amr tried to increase, to implant his loyalists in order to have like dominance everywhere in the regime. Um, so Zakaria Muhyiddin, he was like one of Abdel Nasser loyalists, and he designed the entire security sector, and he was in charge of oversighting or supervising all the civilian security agencies. But actually, except for the President Office of Information, um, like the military and all the intelligence apparatuses came under Amir's control, and the military was his like own power base. So throughout, like since the late 50s and throughout like the 60s until the June defeat, um, like we had like two camps we can speak of, like two camps: Nasser, um, Ali Sabri, Sha'rawi Goma, and Sami Sharaf on his side. Like this is like one camp, and the other camp, Amir and Salah Nasr and Shams Badran. These figures, are very important because they actually dominated the political scene until the June defeat and after June defeat, and they managed to persist under Sadat, and Sadat had to eliminate, these power centers when he reached power. So actually, even like the director of the President Bureau of Information, Sami Sharaf back then admitted that the military was kind of growing beyond Nasser control, as like a political counter to he tried to establish. That's why he tried to establish the Arab Socialist Union in order to have like a political body to balance out the power of the military or the army. But actually, the Arab Socialist Union became heavily or deeply embedded in security character as well. Um, and instead of like reducing the weight of the military in the ruling bloc, the Arab Socialist Union became like one of the security and the security apparatus as well, in order to monitor and supervise members and to put them under surveillance. So it was like, it was a body or an institution in order to regulate or to discipline followers rather than like, mobilizing supporters. And actually, Nasser's loyalists or his own circles tried to implant, some of their like men or followers inside the Arab Socialist Union in order to monitor its performance, or and not only to preach like political compliance, but also to report opponents and potential opposition. So by like 1966, the Arab Socialist Union actually penetrated or infiltrated, society, like unions, universities, and different like social associations. And its archives, had more than, according to some sources, had more than 30,000 secret reports, not only on military officers, but also but also on like many civilian figures. Nasser himself actually like explicitly did encourage people or members of the Arab Socialist Union in order to report on each other, in order to spy on each other. So, quote unquote, according to him, you must be courageous enough that when you notice the deviation of deviation of another member, to bring it to the attention of the office. So actually, and even like Salah Nasr complained, of the GIS, of the General Intelligence apparatus. He actually complained about the Arab Socialist Union that evolved or did grow as like one spying body on his own spies, or the like intelligence, the members of the intelligence apparatuses. So things got even worse, or like in order to tighten, the state control over society, or in order to brutally suppress potential opposition or the transformation of any social discontent into rights or social action. So the creation of the Vanguard organization uh, inside the Arab Socialist Union, it was like a secret organization, and initially designed in order to help like with the indoctrination, but rapidly like evolved into a kind of a fledged intelligence body. So it meant to be like, as Nasser himself expressed in its founding meeting, it was meant to be like, a cornerstone of like a political arm of the regime, in order again to offset the power of the increasing power of the military and the power centers of Abdel Hakim Amr and his cronies. Um, and it actually was a secretive body until 1962. But again, because it was embedded into this kind of security character, so it worked as a political Gestapo, like a secret, the secret police under the Nazi regime, notoriously known for ruthless suppression of the opposition. So it was very clear the security character, or the security element of the Vanguard organization, if we look into the membership and its charter. So if we looked into the membership, like two of the four founding members, Sharaf and Sabri, they were actually like from the president intelligence office, and the leader was the Minister of Interior. And its charter actually decreed that every member had to report or to present like security report to his supervisor. So actually the political setting and the institutional configuration actually motivated everyone to report on like everyone. So that's why Nasser like tried to secure political compliance, and to prevent, to take kind of precautious measures in order to prevent any social uprisings or any social unrest. So again, like in Nasser, in order to know to what extent, like they were deeply embedded into this kind of security network, and this kind of heavy or tight control over society. Um, so in Nasser's words, were very expressive. So he mentioned, like in a meeting with the Vanguard organization, it functioned as a secret police, as I mentioned, and it was like similar to the secret police under the Nazi rule. So according to Nasser, he mentioned like we need supporters within the executive branches and administration for surveillance and oversight. And according to him again, I believe that it would be impossible for the army to prepare for a coup without without kind of political support. So he was like, really, really worried about, the increasing role of the army. And he tried like repeatedly in order to mitigate, the increasing power, or the Abdel Hakim Amir's power. And that became like very obvious after the June defeat, when Nasser and his allies or cronies actually eliminated these power centers by like getting rid of Abdel Hakim Amir and his followers, or his loyalists. He didn't manage actually to decrease the ratio of military officers in the cabinet. So by 1961, the military officers, did account for or composed like 52% of the entire members of the cabinet, and he managed to decrease this percentage in 1964 to 36%. But because of Abdel Hakim Amr and the heavy intervention into like these kind of political decisions, Abdel Hakim Amr did challenge Nasser, and he increased again this ratio to 55% in 1965. So actually, it was not new, this kind of struggle for power or for supremacy between Nasser and different, power centers. But it became much more obvious and salient after the June defeat. So Nasser decided to deliver, like, to resign and to have, like, to deliver a speech to the public in order to declare his responsibility for the June defeat. And he decided to nominate his friend Zakaria Muhyiddin as a president. Abdel Hakim Amr asked for a different nomination in order to nominate one of his, like, men, one of his loyalists, Shams Badran. And of course, like, Nasser followed, didn't, like, actually listen to Abdel Hakim Amr, and he delivered the speech, and he declared the nomination of Zakaria Muhyiddin. So Abdel Hakim Amr, like, started to implore and his, like, to launch kind of a campaign against Nasser in order to and to move from, like, the slander to action by, like, distorting the image of Nasser and trying to mobilize people against him and to overthrow him from power. So this actually triggered, a counteraction from Nasser and his loyalist circle. So this kind of, it was efficient, like, the campaign was kind of efficient in order to distort Nasser image. But Zakaria Muhyiddin, alongside with Sami Sharaf and Sha'rawi Goma, they managed to arrest Abdel Hakim Amr and actually to surround his house and to launch kind of an investigation in order to purge all the intelligence apparatuses of Abdel Hakim Amr's cronies. And it was on 24th of August in 1967, like right after the defeat. They arrested Abdel Hakim Amr, and they placed more than, I think, more than 150 military officers and intelligence operatives in custody, including Salah Nasser, the director of the General Intelligence Apparatus. And they tried to take, some harsh measures in order to depoliticize the military as well, purging the military of Abdel Hakim Amr's followers, and to redirect, or to reorient the intelligence apparatus, especially the military one, to external espionage. On 13th of September, like, Abdel Hakim Amr died, and supposedly he committed a suicide, and they continued, the intelligence apparatuses continued with the investigation processes in order to investigate the causes of the defeat, in order to declare something or to announce something to the public, and to offer a kind of reasonable justification of the June defeat. And actually, they placed the blame on the intelligence apparatuses, and as they declared Nasser himself before the National Assembly in November 1967, they agreed on, like, that they lost control over the military and security agencies because of this kind of the very existence of the power centers and the corrupt, leaders, referring to Abdel Hakim Amr and his loyalists, and that's why they kind of they undertook, like, harsh measures or comprehensive purge of Amr loyalists between November 1967 till February 1968, and they managed to decrease the officers inside in the cabinet from 65% to 21. And in the Arab Socialist Union itself from 75 to 43. And actually, Nasser tried to, he actually, like, took several steps in order to restructure the institutional setting in order to tighten its control over, like, the intelligence sectors and the military as well. So he gave himself kind of extensive power by placing, or like, the heads of the service sectors or intelligence sectors, and place them under his control and ask them to report directly to the president. and he established another like political or like military body called the National Defense Council, composed of the president and top like his top ministers and security advisors. And actually the council took over the responsibility of determining Egypt national security interest from the SCAF, the Supreme Council for of Armed Forces. And they dissolved the intelligence sector inside the military, and they created one special section within the general intelligence sector in order to supervise the political trends of the military officers, in order to report the political stand of different military officers to the intelligence apparatus. According to some readings, like Nasser had to declare, some of political reform measures because of students' demonstrations in 1968. It was like Nasserism actually after the June defeat became like an object of criticism, and he tried to tighten his control over society, but like things actually developed or evolved into a point of no return. But he tried to deliberate with his like friends or allies what kind of measures should be taken in order to reform the system, as in his words, like he called it like system, because he repeatedly admitted kind of failure and kind of weakness, and he needed actually to take some serious steps in order to overhaul the entire system. So by placing the blame on the military intelligence complex, so they tried to make some promises in order to open up the political system. So he actually promised to write like a permanent constitution in 1970, and the constitution like was ratified in 1971, and he undertook like some serious measures in order to reform the security sector, but still like the remaining like three security bodies remained intact, and actually prevented any kind of meaningful political opening policies. Like the Interior Ministry and its like general intelligence body remained intact, and the President Intelligence Agency as well. And this kind of the vanguard organization and the security-oriented Arab Socialist Union remained or persisted in order to increase the control over society and any kind of emerging political opposition. So it was kind of shifting kind of responsibilities of surveillance and control from the military to different bodies or different political institutions in order to neutralize the military. So because like the intelligence apparatus and the president's office, intelligence office, they were kind of busy was like was oversighting and investigating the causes of the defeat. So neither actually had the capacity to suppress any kind of, or to repress opposition or any kind of social unrest. So that's why the Nasser actually and the regime actually took the decision of creating or establishing paramilitary police forces. They called it was called like it's the Central Security Forces in 1969. So the main object was kind of to obviate the military involvement in rights control or any kind of involvement in any kind of social unrest. So that's why they established this anti-right shock units, and it was mainly composed of military conscripts and it was put under the supervision, and it continued actually under the supervision of the Interior Ministry. So it was actually, as I mentioned, like shifting responsibilities of surveillance and control from like the military and some bodies of the um, intelligence or from the intelligence apparatuses to some other institutions or bodies that were placed under the control of Nasser himself or his allies, trusted allies. And it was like if things like were actually under control, or he managed actually to suppress any political and social opposition before the June defeat. So things got even worse after the defeat, because he had the very reason in order to shut down or to close off any kind of political space before political opposition or any kind of oppositional voices. So the geopolitics as well didn't help, and it didn't help with the like meaningful political reform or the emergence of social and political meaningful like social and political unrest. And it helped to continue. It helped with the continuation of the dominance of the security apparatus and the Nasser security men as well. So as we mentioned, like in the last lecture, when we talked about the war of attrition, and this like how Nasser actually developed like close ties with the Soviet Union in order to get like some military equipment in order to help Egypt with coping with the military advancement of Israel. So he had like shifting alliance explicitly toward the East Bloc and Moscow. And because of the obsession, the Soviet Union obsession with this kind of security control, so they had very reason, Nasser and his allies had very reason, or like they had like a permissible environment in order to expose themselves as guarantors of a continued Soviet alliance against any kind of potential pro-Western forces. So it helped as well, like the geopolitics as well, helped with the consolidation of this security control or enhancement of the security control over society, and the harsh crackdown on any and brutal crackdown on any potential opposition. But what happened during that period, it was like it was very difficult. It was like practical difficulties given this kind of geopolitics and the wartime period. It was very difficult to have like mass demonstrations against Nasser. And people, I'm not sure actually, some of the readings mentioned like the Socialist Union actually manufactured the demonstrations that supported Nasser after he delivered the resignation speech. But like no doubt, regardless of how accurate this argument is, Nasser like had popularity, and it was very difficult. The only like potential opposition came from Islamists, and June defeat actually it did feed into this Islamic sentiments, especially in the universities. So it became like very popular, this widely used phrase like they left God, and so they were let down by God. So it became like very very popular amongst some Islamist forces or Islamic movements that started to emerge again in the universities, and in society as well. Like some like religious figures started to hint at this kind of secular nationalist ideology, and how like the deviation from the path of God was like the only reason for the defeat. So they tried to pave the way or to lay the groundwork for the Islamic revival that became very obvious under Sadat, and it took kind of political. It had kind of clear political aspect in the 70s. So it cared mainly about like this kind of piety and how like people needed to go back to God in order to help Egypt, to get out of this defeat and to get back, to put Egypt back on the right path, away from this secular nationalist ideology of Nasser. So actually, the death of Pan-Arabism left kind of ideological vacuum that filled actually by or filled with this kind of Islamic sentiment. It was not very clear in the late 60s, but it became, like as I mentioned, very, yeah, it prevailed clearly under Sadat. So people like, or some works actually, some scholarly works actually questioned, the intentions of Nasser, whether or not he really wanted to undertake kind of meaningful political reform. And if we go back to like his speeches, or like the meetings he did have with his circles or with his allies, after the June defeat, so we can actually make sure to what extent he needed, or he did aim at, undertaking meaningful political reform measures. So if we look into like the meetings with the higher executive committee of the Arab Socialist Union, like 1 month after the defeat in July 1967, he mentioned like he really wanted to reform the system, because he depicted what happened as a failure of the system. And it was kind of when, ironically enough, like the cronies like Ali Sabri, Sha'rawi, Goma, including Sadat, actually they rejected any kind of serious move towards political opening. Nasser did mention something about like creating or allowing a real opposition party to flourish or to emerge, in order to have like different like political platform, because as he mentioned, it was kind of a facade of this kind of intellectual unity, when the cronies mentioned something about the intellectual unity of the three officers and the revolution of, as they called it, like of 1952. He didn't agree, on this statement, and they depicted democracy as kind of disagreement and differences between themselves, like between different, like viewpoints, they did hold. So democracy for them was kind of different opinions within the same like frame, the revolutionary frame of Nasserism. Nasser actually disagreed, and he made many references to Mao Zedong in China and his cultural revolution, and how the free officers and his regime actually failed in undertaking this kind of cultural revolution. So that's why they deliberated about creating opposition party. And when they mentioned something about different opinions between Sadat and Sabri and Gum'a, and that for them was kind of opposition and political opposition as like a manifestation of democracy, Nasser called it it's kind of deformed opposition. So he didn't genuinely or perhaps out of like emotional impulse, like 1 month after the defeat, as he mentioned, actually he himself mentioned this repeatedly, like he needed to put an end to this any kind of impulsive reaction or impulsive action, and to take kind of reasonable action in order to deal with the defeat. So in this meeting, he explicitly emphasized the need for the need to have like political opposition and meaningful pluralistic political space. And Sadat and Sabri and Gum'a actually the rejected the idea. And then was kind of a retreat on different discourse in his speech in the National Assembly in November 1967, like a few months later. Uh, he repeatedly mentioned like the power centers and the intelligence apparatuses as like the main source of the defeat, and how the regime actually followed, some steps in order to purge the country of these power centers and to reestablish, the intelligence apparatuses. And he mentioned, like, this was something, that it happened. It was kind of, it's not normal, but it's kind of, he declared his responsibility, but it's something happened, or like it's something, had to happen to any regime, and the regime had to respond by taking some measures in order to correct for, these mistakes. Um, and he actually he mentioned, like, he was not able to have, like, intelligence on the intelligence sector, on the to spy on the intelligence apparatuses. So that's why he put an end, with purging to this, by purging the country of the power centers, in a reference to Abdel Hakim Amir and his allies. Um, and and the reform measures, he followed. He actually framed, these reforms as wide democratic participation. So for him, like, purging the country of the power centers and correcting for, like, any kind of corrupt behavior of these power centers that were in it. These power centers actually were in charge of the committee of liquidating the feudalism. So that's why it was kind of misallocation of the resources. So that's why he had to investigate, this kind of corrupt behavior, and he framed this as a wide democratic participation. So he actually, like, retreated from, this idea of having, like, political opposition in open political space. And actually he repeatedly made a reference to his statement, like, no voice would rise above, like, the voice of the battle, in order to put an end, or to, like, to take, some serious measures in order to brutally put down any potential social uprising or social unrest. So he managed actually to continue with his, like, policy of tightening control over society and eliminating any kind of political opposition. And he didn't actually offer any kind of reform or revision, to his, like, conception of democratic participation and political opposition. And the regime just, shifted responsibility of surveillance and discipline to different security apparatuses in order to put them under direct control of the president. So back to, like, if you remember, this is, like, the very last thing we talked about in week 6, when we talked about, like, Nasser foreign policy and how he capitalized on several opportunities and relegated some challenges for a little while to the margin in order to make use of the geopolitics and advance his main pillar or program of foreign policy. And to what extent we can speak of 1967 as, like, a crucial or, like, a rupture point. So we can speak of before and after, 1967 when it comes to Nasser foreign policy. So let me offer kind of a recap of Nasser's, foreign policy, in order to understand to what extent 1967 had long-term implications for Egypt foreign policy and the regional dynamic, the relationship between Egypt and neighboring countries after the death of Nasser. So actually, so Nasser, mainly during the 50s and 60s, he made use of the geopolitics and this kind of bipolar international system. So the foreign policy was actually a function of his values and perceptions, with like in addition to this kind of international context as well. So the main pillars of his foreign policy program: anti-imperialism and pan-Arabism. And for some time, this offered him like some or provided him with the room for maneuvering. So anti-imperialism and pan-Arabism like offered some opportunities for him in order to reshape the foreign policy. So basically, firstly, he emphasized this unity of ranks in order to mitigate, the any kind of increasing influence of the Western power in the region. And then he didn't have any clear plan of federal unionism, but he moved, toward this direction with the establishment, the federal union with Syria. And then after, they broke apart, he emphasized, he went back to this kind of pragmatic emphasis on Arab solidarity. And then he started his ideological war against conservative regime by emphasizing the need of exporting the revolution and placing the blame of the collapse of the Arab United Republic on the existence of these kind of conservative monarchies. So that's why the only way out, or the only way in order to achieve or to carry out meaningful social revolution, or to consolidate, this pan-Arabism and transform pan-Arabism into actual and physical existence. The only solution was to export the revolution to these conservative regimes. And after he got actually engaged or involved in the militarily in Yemen against Saudi Arabia. And after that, he had to swing back to Arab solidarity again. And pan-Arabism became kind of a liability after 1967. So because he actually, after the failure of this kind of federal unionism, so he had to champion or to defend, Palestinian in order to live up, to the expectations of the believer, of the wide believers of pan-Arabism. So it became kind of a liability after he got dragged into, this Egypt-Damascus radical axis that, ended with the war defeat in 1967. And he had to revert, or to to go back again to this neo-realist frame, and close ties and with the conservative regimes as well. And he had to accept kind of indirect negotiation with Israel under the leadership of the United States. So that was the brief wrap up, of the pillars of the foreign policy, and how Nasser actually vacillated, between different programs based on, his two main pillars of anti-imperialism and pan-Arabism. So actually, to what extent 1967, could be qualified as a rupture point, or important or critical point, so we can speak of significant changes or radical changes after the June defeat. So if we try to evaluate or to assess Nasser's foreign policy, so some studies actually framed his foreign policy as a kind of a success, especially with the emergence of the regional Arab system, or the independent Arab state system. So it does carry some truth, but we have to be relative about this. If we look into leadership cost, for example, it was very high cost, and some of the Arab leaders, like the Ba'ath Party in Syria and Arif regime in Iraq as well, they repeatedly had this kind of repulsive attitudes towards Nasser's dominant approach or domineering policy, and they refused to concede too much to Nasser's leadership. So what he made, he made something close to the organization of the region. And according to some of the literature, it was like some countries just tried to appease or to bandwagon with Egypt, rather than establishing a independent Arab system as well. So he managed to rearrange or to reorganize the kind of the dynamics in the region, and to establish like a system of the Arab state. But this actually, it didn't continue after the June defeat, and even before the June defeat, it had some weaknesses as well. So he tried, and it had the pan-Arabism, it didn't go far beyond this kind of rhetoric or political discourse. He tried several times to take it to the economic domain, in order to achieve kind of economic objectives or economic policies. So there was a thought to establish Arab common market, and he had the Arab Oil Conference in 1959 in order to kind of to motivate the oil rich countries, in order to allocate 5% of its budget in order to finance some development programs in other countries. But this idea was never implemented or carried out. So it didn't reach beyond this kind of political and political use or rhetoric level, in order to achieve some material and economic benefits. And his policies actually had kind of decreasing returns over time. So the same policies actually that offered him some room for maneuvering before 1967, and offered some space for leadership for Egypt, it led to the June defeat as well. So it backfired somehow, and it didn't lead to mitigation or decreasing influence of the Western power. It's like the opposite way around. Actually, it led to more involvement of Western power. Even before the defeat, he had to align himself, or to align Egypt with the East Bloc, with the Soviet Union, in order to get some economic aids and material aids as well. So he became more kind of dependent on the Soviet Union, in order to supply the offensive weapons, especially after the Rabat summit in 1969, when he asked for an immediate solution or immediate transfer of military aid or kind of economic aid, in order to reestablish the army. And he didn't get a satisfactory response from the Arab countries. So that's why he declared he had to align himself, to shift alliance toward the Soviet Union, which increased actually the leverage or the influence of the Soviet Union in Egypt. So more importantly, pan-Arabism actually became kind of a liability, because after the June defeat, actually he took this many steps further, and instead of championing, instead of defending the Palestinian cause, the frontline regimes had to vindicate themselves against Israel, and that actually threatened the very existence of the state and its interests more directly, and they were logged. It actually locked them into the struggle, and instead of giving speeches or mobilizing mass support for the pan-Arabism cause, or in order to sympathize with the Palestinian issue, so now they themselves they were threatened by the existence of of, the, of Zionism and the Israeli occupation of their lands. As I mentioned, like the talk like the West Bank from Jordan and the Golan Heights from Syria and the occupied Sinai in Egypt. So actually and things got worse, when this kind of waning, of the pan-Arabism like gave rise to more radical reaction from Palestinian guerrilla groups or paramilitary organizations that they established their kind of bases in Jordan. And it actually led to, as I mentioned last lecture, to the Black September in 1970, when Hussein brutally cracked down on the guerrilla movements, Palestinian, paramilitary organizations. And Nasser had to mediate in order to seek kind of an agreement between Palestinians and the king in Jordan. And the summit in Cairo of 1970 was the last political activity of Nasser in the region. So in order to, again, to evaluate the Nasser foreign policy before and after 1967, we have to take into consideration that was the exercise you should have thought about. So we need to have to take into consideration so many elements or criteria in order to compare his foreign policy programs against. So leadership cost, the reaction of Arab leaders, whether or not they unconditionally kind of accepted this leading role of Egypt of under Nasser or not, and to what extent he established kind of regional Arab state system in the region before 1967. We will go into we'll go into this when we study the international politics of the Middle East later. I think 2 weeks in 2 weeks or something. So actually it was the war defeat. It did strike kind of a death blow to pan-Arabism, and it led to it helped with abandoning Nasser's this nationalist and pan-Arabist policy. So it was kind of a catalyst for long-term radical changes in the region, and helped Egypt later under Sadat to disengage from this commitment or advocacy of pan-Arabism in order to promote a different idea of Egypt patriotism or Egypt-centric identity. So the June defeat actually it had it didn't the ramifications or the implications were not limited to this ideological content or ideological results of the mortal blow of pan-Arabism, but it had it came with the new sets of challenges as well after Nasser, especially economic difficulties, as we are gonna investigate when we talk about what kind of economic challenges Sadat had to face while making foreign policy decisions. And he had the Sadat had to reestablish new support base or new independent bases of legitimacy, and he had to establish new international alignment as well in order to in order to help with the Nasserization. But still after the death of Nasser, regardless of he was a charismatic leadership, and Sadat lacked this kind of charisma, and it took him several years in order to win the war in 1973 in order to establish independent base of legitimacy. But still the president played the pivotal and central role in shaping the broad lines of foreign policy, given he no existence of kind of political accountability or political opposition whatsoever that gave the president domestic leeway in order to make whatever decision he wanted, and in order to mute any kind of serious and leading critics. So that was like, that happened in like under Nasser and happened under Sadat within, again, the parameter, set by the international and regional context. So evaluating like, what happened, after 1967, um, it was kind of continuity, and a significant rupture happened under Sadat with the changes like, happened in the international context and the geopolitics as well, and the new set, it came with the new sets of challenges and opportunities that like, helped with like shifting away from Nasser's, main pillars of pan-Arabism and anti-imperialism, and as we are going to see how Sadat like, reshaped the foreign policy programs or the broad lines of the foreign policy in Egypt after Nasser. So we still have like 15 minutes, so we can like go over the main pillars of Sadat foreign policy. So this is the topic of this week. So we're gonna like investigate or examine like the process, the peace process, and how Sadat, came to, this separate peace at Camp David, and how he reshaped the broad lines again of Egypt's foreign policy. So the questions we will try to answer this week: how did like this changing in domestic environment, how did like the changes in the domestic environment affect Egypt's foreign policy in the 1970s, and how did Egypt actually conclude like a bilateral peace treaty with Israel? So again, like if we need to like investigate or to examine the determinants and the environment of the foreign policy of any country, so we have to look into like the capabilities, the domestic like, conditions and capabilities in a given country, and this kind of aspiration and needs of policymakers. In the case of Egypt, it actually like the perceptions and aspirations and values of the president is like, undisputed, kind of unaccountable decision maker, and how he made this decision, towards, other countries, and affected and how he affected and got affected by external environment. So it was a function of like perceptions and values of leadership, and some like domestic opportunities and challenges as well. Even like perceptions of these kind of domestic opportunities and challenges, these kind of perceptions fed back into policy making, or the foreign policy making. So basically here, like the new, what kind of changes like happened in the external environment and the domestic environment after the death of Nasser. So for the external environment, Sadat actually developed more close like ties and relations with the United States, and the relationship with the Soviet Union actually deteriorated with the expulsion of his decision to expel the Soviet advisors. So externally, he had to align, or he wanted actually to align himself, with the United States, and to shift away from the East Bloc to the Western great power. Domestic like environment, we're gonna repeat like, what we said like about the domestic challenges under Nasser as well, when it comes to the military and defense expenditures, and the economic burden as well, and the heavy reliance on foreign aid. So again, like if we looked at this table, still, like, the deficit, the trade balance, was negative in 1970, 1971, 1972. So the balance of payment actually skyrocketed only in 1973, and it achieved kind of healthy surplus, but still, like, decreased again in 1974 and reached alarming level. So it's still, like, the state of economy was kind of deteriorating, and he had to rely more on external and foreign aid in order to finance, the budget. And the military expenditure as well, it did eat up, like, a high percentage of the gross national product. So relatively, like, it was higher than other countries, like even like frontline regime like Syria as well. So according to this table, like in 1970, like the defense expenditure, like, composed of like 19% of the GNP, and increased to 21 in 1971, and 31% in 1973, and roughly like half of the GNP in 1975. So it actually imposed kind of serious domestic challenges that affected the decision making, that affected the perception of the decision maker and the actual decision making process, given like the available resources and given the kind of realistic constraints. So the only way out, of this, it was like the reliance on the foreign aid that actually Egypt indebted to Saudi Arabia only by 1973, with like more than like $27,000 million, and to the East Bloc as well, that financed many like civilian projects with roughly like $1,000 million, well, according to Dawish's numbers. So of course, like, this domestic environment imposed kind of constraints and challenges, and he had nothing to do with decreasing the military expenditure, especially in the case of in the wartime period with Israel, and he had to recover, some of the territories or some of the Egypt's lands. And what added, like, this kind of the image about Egypt, or the Arabs actually considered, like, Egypt as a backbone of the struggle against Israel, as like widely used phrase, like there had been, like, no war with Israel without Egypt. So that's why it added more, to the military cost, in order to increase, this military expenditure, in order to face or to confront Israel, not only to liberate, or to recover territories in Egypt, but also, like, to live up to the expectations of the Arabs. And actually, Sadat, before 1973, he was not able. He deviated a little bit from the pillars of Nasser, but he was not able to break, loose from Nasserist ideology. And strategically, regardless of he genuinely believed in this or not, he had to remind, listeners and the public about, Nasserism all the time, in order to legitimize, his rule as well, because he, before the war, before 1973, he didn't have like any independent legitimate base of governance. So, like, any kind of economic aid or foreign aid came with a package, with political conditionality as well, that added more kind of challenges and constraints on the foreign policy of Egypt. Domestically, actually, he continued with this kind of repressive and authoritarian structure as well. Like he put, like, Egyptian press under his control, and the press, like, many kind of media layouts had to follow the dictates of the decision makers. So he actually muted any kind of leading, critical voices from getting their message across, to the public. And again, like, like Nasser, he managed to co-opt Al-Azhar, like, continued with the supporting the president, and this kind of co-optation of the religious establishment continued with Sadat as well. And when actually when he reached power after Nasser, it was like, this prolonged state of no war, no peace. So people got really angry against, this stagnant, status quo, kind of. So students or student unions actually started to organize, demonstrations, and to vocalize, their opposition or their anger, to place their anger at the regime, with kind of different manifestations of social protest and social demonstrations. So Al-Azhar was used in order to support the president, and in order to praise, his wide kind of leadership, in order to guarantee kind of political compliance, and to legitimize, his any kind of political action or political decision. So using kind of religious elements and religious discourse, they legitimized, or Al-Azhar, like, sheikhs, or and Al-Azhar University as well, tried uh, to to put an end, or to put down any kind of student unrest or student uprising, by, like, praising, the leadership and the guidance of the Sadat, and announcing unconditional support, of Sadat as a leadership of Islam and Arabs. And the Al-Azhar University as well tried to offer, like, much more support from to gather, or to mobilize, some of the students in order to support the Sadat, using, some, again, like, Islamic elements or religious elements, as kind of God has entrusted, Sadat with guiding, the shape of the state. So that's why, people had unconditionally, to abide by, or to conform to the boundaries, the any kind of decisions that had to take. Okay, so like, one important thing, like, contrary to Nasser, like, he had, like, kind of extensive, as a president, he had kind of unconditional or unquestionable, kind of power as a president. So that institutionally he didn't have, like, any kind of political and serious political opposition, or he had the capacity in order to suppress any potential political opposition, but he had to govern kind of collectively. So after Nasser, what emerged was kind of institutional setting that allowed for collective leadership between Sadat as a president and two vice presidents, Ali Sabri and Shafi'i, and then Mohammed Fawzi as the prime minister, Sha'rawi Gum'a as the minister of interior, and Mohammed Fawzi as the minister of defense. So it was kind of a collective leadership from, like, the previous, power centers. So they had this perception that, like, Sadat was kind of the first among equals, but he didn't share, like, the same perception. So they felt like, like Nasser, like, opted for him, but he had no leverage or political power, more political power than his competitors. So that was, like, the perception of the of different power centers under Sadat. But he had this inclination, towards, governing unilaterally, but it took time in order to establish or to build his own support base. So they tried actually to overthrow him, but he managed to eliminate, all the power centers by mid-May 1971. And he repeatedly addressed, the public, or he tried to make clear this kind of contract or agreement between the people, the Egyptians, and himself, as kind of a functional relationship, in order to preserve, in his own, words, to preserve and strengthen national unity in preparation for the battle of destiny. So it was like kind of conditional support based on successful functionality, kind of. So they would like support him in order to take them to the battle, in order to win it and to liberate Egypt and to recover the land. So he was not like, still, like, in order to build, a support base, as I mentioned, it took like several years, and he was not able to step out of this shadow of Nasserism. So he tried to establish, like, mass support by announcing, for example, in 1971, announcing that it would be a year of decision, meaning, like, when people like got really angry at him because of this no war, no peace state. So he tried to offer them like reason in order to gain, like, more legitimate base of governance, as this year would be a year of decision, meaning like a year of war, in order to recover or to liberate their territories. One more move, like when like a year passed and he didn't manage to plan for a war, so he had to expel the Soviet advisors in 1972, in order to project the image of this kind of political leader that took, like, decisive decisions, and he had like the ability in order to run the country's affairs. And he managed to purge the military of any kind of power centers, and to place the military under the president control. And still, the Arab Socialist Union and the National Assembly, it was kind of, these were kind of legitimizing, institutions or agents. They didn't really pose any kind of threat on Sadat. So occasionally, like, the National Assembly had some of like critical voices, but these voices like directed at the prime minister, and again, because of like this kind of no war, no peace state. So he had like to adhere to, like, Nasserism and Nasser, like, main pillars of pan-Arabism and anti-imperialism, even lightly, but he couldn't deviate, like, much from these two main pillars. And he had like to show like this unequivocal adherence to the memory and the principle of Nasserism. And in his own term, in his own like words, what Nasser left, or the legacy of Nasser, was kind of inexhaustible kind of treasure for us forever. So he had to repeatedly remind the public, or the Egyptians, about Nasserism, in order to offer kind of sense of belonging, or affinity between himself and Nasserism, before establishing his independent, legitimate base after the war. So we will continue, on in the next lecture.